Thanks for doing a great job on all those songs this morning. We really do appreciate it. So, this is part 6 of 6 in this series, and I want to begin by saying your enthusiasm has been incredible, and it's been contagious. I love the fact that you have just jumped into this series with me full force and really tried to wrap your brains around it, as it's been an intellectual series, not an emotional series. Emotional series are a little bit easier to get on board with because you talk about something and it tugs at the heartstrings, or you remember a loved one or a friend, or you're going through a situation, and you can just go with it a lot easier. But when you're strictly dealing with an intellectual situation, it does require intentional effort. And you have put in as much effort as I have in making this series successful. So I thank you for that. And also, I've kind of fibbed a little bit, and that is, this isn't really the end of the series. It's just partially the end. We're beginning into the final topic today, but it's going to dovetail into next week's, where we're going to take a deeper dive into it yet. So today is about morality. Next week, we're going to talk about what that looks like when we go to vote. And we are going to talk about abortion and some of those issues that need to be addressed. I don't bring up political issues. I bring up spiritual issues. If the Bible talks about it, I talk about it. So I'm not going to talk about foreign trade agreements. That's not, the Bible doesn't really address that. But it does address life and the value of life. And we're going to cover what the Scriptures have to say about it. And I think that this might be the most important part of the whole series in our understanding. So we need to be doing that the next couple of weeks. And then the week after the election, we're going to take time to go into a wrap-up where we're going to overview the 4 main questions. I'm going to give you a little bit of information that we didn't get a chance to touch on, and then we're going to wrap up after that and get ready for Thanksgiving. Hard to believe, isn't it? 61 days until Christmas. We are coming along. And I'm going to give a little personal plug here before I start the sermon, and that is, on Facebook, you're going to see a 50-day to Christmas countdown, and that's coming from yours truly. I'm going to do a blog, so you'll be able to read it. I'll put some videos out there. I'm not going to commit to 50 videos, because I'm pretty sure I won't do that. But I am going to commit to getting some videos out there for this countdown to Christmas. I hope you'll get on there, you'll like it, you'll share it, you'll be a part of it as we do try to get focused on what really matters this time of year. All right, all that said, where do the concluding thoughts to this series begin? We've looked for the existence of God through the telescope and the microscope. We've seen plenty of evidence that God exists. Now we're going to look at something that is not scientific in nature, but is instead philosophical. It's the argument you've known since you were a kid. And the argument is this: if there is one thing that is truly wrong, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. And you say, well, why? Why does there have to be a God? Because if there is no God, it is just your opinion versus Hitler's opinion. There's no standard of right and wrong if God does not exist. Who says Hitler is wrong? Well, society does. Where does society get the notion of right and wrong? It's you versus them in a matter of opinion without God. But I think people understand that there are objective right and wrongs. There has to be. And they are found in a place outside of humanity, namely God. On April 29, 1945, the Allies liberated Dachau, which was a concentration camp in Germany. And this is what they found when they got there. Yes, that is a pile of bodies. Now, if there is no God, then you can't complain and say that this is wrong. You don't have to like it, but you can't say it's wrong. Because it is just your opinion versus Hitler's opinion. Again, I didn't say you had to like it. But if there is no God, by what objective standard can you point to? Every standard you point to would be subjective. Well, that most people don't like, well, but that's true for some of those people, but not these people. How do you come to terms with what is right and wrong without God? This concentration camp that you have a picture of here is where they experimented on people like lab rats. They experimented on children, men and women, and then they would starve them to death and pile them up when they were done. And it happened just outside of town where a village went by its daily work. Bakers went to bake, and shopkeepers managed their shops, and they raised their kids, and they went to school, and this happened right up the hill from where life was going. We know this is wrong. I don't have to convince you this is wrong. You know it and I know it. The question is, why? Why is it wrong? Why do we know it's wrong? We know it's wrong because there is a standard beyond humanity. In fact, how do we know what is right and wrong? Think of it like this. Here we have Mother Teresa and we have Hitler. And the question we want to ask is, how do you discover who is right and wrong? And I know if I ask you that question, you would say, well, I'd go with Mother Teresa. And I'd say, why? You'd say, well, she worked with the poorest of the poor in India, devoted her life to lifting these people up out of poverty and loving them and helping them when nobody else would. And Hitler killed people who weren't the right race, weren't the right type of person. Okay, I agree with your synopsis. I agree that Mother Teresa is a better option than Hitler. But we still haven't answered the question of how can we know that? How do we know that? How do we know that she is right and he is wrong? All right. I asked a couple of grade schoolers this week to do me a favor. I asked them to draw me a map of the United States. And these are the two pictures that I got. All right? Now, if I were to ask you which of these two maps is a better representation of the United States as it actually is, what would you need to judge it? You would need a picture of the actual United States. And therefore we can look at it and say, well, the red one's a little bit closer than the purple one. And that would be our reference point. If we don't have the center map, the actual map of the United States, we have no way to judge which one's better. If we don't have that map, then what's it matter? The United States could be a circle, it could be a square, it could be non-existent. Without the map in the middle, we have no point of reference. We have to have an objective reference point to judge which map is closer to the actual United States. And that's what we do when we compare Hitler and Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa isn't the standard. And Hitler's not the standard. But you know what? We make people standards all the time. How many times have you heard someone say, or maybe even you've said, well, I'm not Hitler. Well, congratulations. You have just gotten off the bottom of the worst of humanity. Well done. Well done. And you're not Mother Teresa. Well, how many people were? I mean, come on, we're playing a game here. But how do we make the judgment on who is better? Because there is a ruler, a standard of measurement that is greater than them. And that's God. We say God sets the standard of right and wrong. Mother Teresa measured up better than Hitler. There's a standard by which we judge them both. If that standard, if that ruler did not exist, you can't judge between the two. You can have an opinion about the two, but you can't say one is right and one is wrong. It's the unchanging standard of God, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that is the standard we make these judgments by. Now, I would say virtually everyone knows right from wrong. And we know right and wrong not by our actions, but we know it by our reactions. You may not think too much about taking a small object that no one will notice and slipping it in your pocket. But as soon as someone takes something that is yours, what do you say? Hey, that's stealing, that's mine, that's wrong. If someone tells you they don't believe in right and wrong, kick them in the shin and steal their iPhone. All right? They're going to get over that idea really fast. In fact, Indiana University, a number of years ago, had a professor give an assignment in his ethics class. He said that you could write on anything you wanted as long as it related to ethics. Had to be no more than 20 pages, had to be typed, properly referenced and footnoted, turned in by October 15th. Well, one of his students was an atheist, and he wrote on moral relativism. That's the belief that there is no standard of right and wrong, it's just your opinion. I like chocolate, you like vanilla, it's just the way it is. And so he wrote his whole paper on it, typed, less than 20 pages, properly referenced, footnoted, turned in with a blue folder. The professor read the whole paper, and on the front of it, he wrote F, I don't like blue folders. Well, he handed out the papers at the next class, and at the end of the class, the student was just fuming and ticked off. He says, F, I don't like blue folders. What does that mean? Professor said, hold on. I read a lot of papers. Let me see if I can remember yours right. Yours is the one who said there is no right and wrong. It's just a matter of opinion. I like chocolate. You like vanilla. He goes, yeah, that's what I believe. He goes, you get an F. I don't like blue folders. And all of a sudden, the student realized he was judging the professor by the unchanging standard of right and wrong that he claimed did not exist. He was telling the professor that there's no right or wrong, but then he charged the professor with doing wrong. That's exactly what people do when they claim moral relativism. That's exactly what they do when they look at society and they say, well, there's no right or wrong, but that, I don't like that. That's wrong. You can't call something wrong unless there is something that is right. In fact, let's get a little bit uncomfortable here. And we're going to talk about some things that you don't want to necessarily hear or think about, but let's get real. If there is no objective morality, the Nazis weren't wrong. The Nazis weren't wrong. Frank Turek was doing question and answers at a college campus a few years ago when a couple students came up to him and they didn't believe in moral absolutes. They didn't believe in objective morality. So Frank Turek said, well, where do you set your basis for how we should live? And one student said, majority rules. Whatever the majority says, you go with. And Frank Turek says, well, in Germany, the majority said that we should murder the people who don't look like us. We should murder the Jews. So you're telling me they were right. Is that correct? And the student paused because he realized the quandary he was in. He said, yeah, the Nazis were right. And the other student said, no, they were wrong. And they started arguing right there. Because that student knew that the right answer was no, the Nazis were wrong. But to be consistent with atheism, he had to say yes. You could ask, why the majority? Why not the minority? Why not just one guy? Who said it has to be the majority? That's the problem with atheism, and that's the problem with moral relativism. The standard always shifts to what's convenient for you, and it's not set to anything that is absolute. Without an absolute authority, you can't say the Nazis were wrong. Or how about this one? Love is no better than rape. The purpose of sex is to reproduce and to continue the human race. Why? Then what's it matter if the person loves you or not? Just keep the human race going. But they don't like it. So what? Who's to say it's wrong? Without God, without objective morality, how can you make the claim? Freedom is no better than slavery. It's funny that people who value freedom say there's no right or wrong. Well, then what's it matter if you're free or not? How about tolerance is no better than intolerance? What's the difference? You say, well, one hurts others and the other one doesn't. Well, who cares? It's a matter of opinion. Don't you see that? A lot of skeptics and atheists will say that whatever, and I've watched a lot of debates where they say this, whatever promotes human flourishing is morally good. Says who? Where do they get that standard from? And if you want to be technical, isn't that the case Hitler made? Why, if we eliminate these people, we're going to create a super race. We're going to move evolution along a little bit faster. We're going to create human flourishing by eliminating the Jews. Now, I don't agree with what he did, and you don't agree with what he did, but that's exactly his approach. There's no consistent way to measure morals without God. Now, the atheists, whenever they debate Christians, they love to point to this one, the religious crusades. If there's no right and wrong, you can't complain about it. If there's no right and wrong, what's the matter if they killed in the name of Allah or Jesus or somebody else or Buddha? You know, what's it matter? If there's no right or wrong, who can say they were wrong, objectively speaking? And finally, can't complain about the problem of evil. You can't complain about the problem of evil if there's no objective morality. C.S. Lewis was an atheist and he became a Christian. His problem with God was that there was too much injustice in the world. There was too much injustice in the world. And he realized that was the evidence he needed to find God. Here's what he writes. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If you have no reference point, how can you call anything unjust? Yet Lewis knew there was injustice, and therefore he knew there had to be justice. In other words, evil doesn't disprove God. It might prove that there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God. If anything, it proves that good exists, and therefore God exists. Evil doesn't disprove God so much as to show us that there is a standard of right and wrong that exists. Now, I do want to pause here for a moment and talk about something that atheists will often accuse Christians of, especially in the debate world, and that is this. We are not saying that atheists cannot be moral. Because I know some people start hearing this, they start to already automatically assume, oh, you're saying I can't be a good person if I'm an atheist. Not at all. In fact, there are some atheists that are better at being good people than some Christians have been at being good people, and that's just being honest. So just, claiming the banner of Jesus doesn't make you a good person. I'm also not saying that atheists don't know morality. They absolutely do. Do you need to have the Bible to know right from wrong? And the answer is no. On the contrary, with the principle, think about how this country was started. What is it? What did we write? We hold these truths to be self-evident. It didn't have to be written down. It was understood. Paul said in Romans that those who have no law have it written on their hearts. In fact, if you have to have the Bible to know right from wrong, how did God judge the whole generation of Noah? They didn't have the Bible yet. Yet it says, God said they were evil and they knew it. Now the Bible will give us more details on how to know right from wrong. It'll give us more insight on what it means to not murder. Oh, that also deals with hate. And we can go on down that list. The Bible gives us more insight. But did you have to be taught not to murder as a kid? Can you imagine Owen and I having this conversation? Owen, that is the third murder you have committed this year. If you do this one more time, so help me, I'm going to send you to live on the farm. Can you see that conversation? Who ever had that conversation? Nobody. And think about it. Did you have to be taught not to steal? You say, oh, I had a friend, or maybe I was. Maybe I was a little klepto and I stole everything. Didn't you always look both ways before you took it? You better believe it, because you knew it was wrong. You knew it was wrong. These are truths that are just ingrained in the human brain. Now, you can train people to murder, and you can train people to steal. But from a young age, you know what's right and what's wrong, and you don't need the Bible to prove it. So we are not saying that atheists cannot be moral. But here's what we are saying. We are saying that atheists can't justify morality. They can theorize about how we know murder is wrong, but atheism provides no immaterial, objective standard that establishes why murder is wrong. And those are important distinctions. Think about it like this. You learned your times table when you were in grade school. Those times tables existed before you were born, before your teacher was born. You learned it, but it already existed. Well, we live in America where murder is wrong. It's taught that it's wrong. But long before America came to be, murder was wrong. That standard already existed. And atheists can offer no satisfactory answer as to why certain morals seem to exist across all cultures, all continents, all times. Not all things are upheld as morally good or bad in all cultures at all times. But there are a few that seem to transcend time, such as murder and theft. The problem with materialism, believing that life is only made up of the material world, is it can't produce ethics or morality. There's no justice molecule. You don't get moral code from biology. Your DNA offers no pathway to morality. There's not a strand in you that tells you what's good and what's bad. You need God to justify morality. We need God for an objective standard of right and wrong, or it's just your opinion. At the very end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon concludes his view on life. Throughout the whole book, Solomon looked through the lens of Ecclesiastes, or through his life as walking with God and walking without God. And here's what he concludes about the whole thing. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. If there is no God, this doesn't matter. But if there is a God, then God brings everything into judgment. And therefore that makes us consider our actions more carefully and closely. If there is no God, why try to be good at all? Why try to follow any moral code? What's the purpose? To make life easy? Well, maybe. But sometimes following a moral code makes life hard. But if there is a God, then we do consider our actions, how we spend our time and our money, what the impact of our daily decisions will be when this life ends. So why do you follow morals if you don't believe in God? Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't follow morals if you're an atheist, and I'm not saying you can't know morality. I'm saying, why are you doing it? What is the motivation? For the Christian, the motivation is we want to honor God. But for the atheist, what's the motivation? What's the motivation? And anything you give is so insignificant and insufficient. Why choose Why do people choose not to believe in God at all? Well, Pascal, I think, said it best. People almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. I think a lot of people choose not to follow God. My microphone's turning. There we go. I think a lot of people choose not to follow God because it's inconvenient. They know they're going to have to make some lifestyle changes. They're just not going to do that. And so why bother? Why go through it? Why feel bad about it? I'll just go about my daily life and distract myself. People want to be a God to themselves. They want to be accountable to no one. If God exists, then what you do has consequences beyond your earthly life. If God does not exist, well, the Russian novelist Dostoevsky said it best. If God does not exist, everything is permissible. Why? Because there's no standard. We can develop cultural norms about what's acceptable to be in a polite society, but for them to mean anything of substance, you have to have God. William Lane Craig made a very important observation about morality. He said things like fairness, goodness, generosity, kindness, love, and loyalty belong to people, not things. Therefore, if there is something that is good, it can't be abstract. It requires a moral being that we call God. And for this reason, we believe that morality is grounded in God and cannot be the byproduct of evolution. If atheism is true, there's no moral standard. For the atheist, humans are accidents of nature. They're highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligation to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, do you say, oh, no, we need to hold a funeral now? No, you say, good job, cat, do it again. If you've ever watched a nature documentary and two lions are battling each other and one kills the other, I mean, is that a tragedy? No. I mean, you might feel sad if you're an animal lover, but if you're like me, you're like, well, let's rewind and watch that again, you know. And but you just don't get hung up on it because animals don't owe each other anything. They don't owe each other anything. And if atheism is true and we have evolved from animals, we owe each other nothing. Yet we know that's not true. We know that life is sacred, or at least we should know. God says we are created in His image. And the further we get away from that truth, the more we'll treat each other like the animals treat one another. That's why we have an abortion problem in this country. That's why we have a all lives matter problem in this country, a Black Lives Matter problem, every life matters problem. We got problems, and they exist because we have no foundation of God in this country. Once we get that foundation right, then we're going to understand why lives truly matter. Of all races, religions, backgrounds, all these lives matter. And it's the foundation of God that doesn't. William Lane Craig simplifies the moral argument for God in 3 simple steps. I don't think he created this, but he articulates it the best. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. It's that simple. If God does not exist, there's not an objective standard of right and wrong. I've seen atheists try to work their way around it. I've yet to find one coherent argument. If it existed, I'd give it to you today so you could hear it. There is not one that exists. Secondly, objective moral values and duties do exist. Murder is wrong. We know that exists. You know, caring for your family is an objective moral value that needs to continue to exist. Therefore, God exists. It's a very simple argument, but it's powerful. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the morality we deal with every single day. The existence of objective moral values point us to God. There was a debate between Christopher Hitchens, who has since passed away, but he was a well-known atheist and humanist, and he was debating Frank Turk, who put this series together. And they were debating morality. And Frank asked Christopher, how can he justify his moral standpoints? Because Christopher wrote a book, and you can still buy it to this day, called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. So Frank Turk asked him, how can you justify that claim? How can you claim that religion is evil? What source are you using to make that measurement? And the debate's like 2 hours long. And I watched it a while back. I rewatched this portion of it specifically a couple weeks ago. And Christopher Hitchens never answers the question. He pointed to supposed people in history who were religious, who did evil things, saying Hitler and Mussolini were Catholic. Yes, and I'm sure all Catholics would agree they were so good at following their faith, right? I mean, come on. No one's going to buy into that. I'm sure there are so many people we could point to all throughout history that made a case for faith to get a following. They claimed a particular religion to get in good with people. In fact, what did Jesus say? He said at the end there will be people who basically they went to church, they claimed the banner of Jesus, they carried their Bible, and Jesus is going to say, away from me, I never knew you. They're going to look like the religious people who follow God, but in fact, at the end of life, they will be separated from Him. Hitchens fails to make his case. He avoids the question of objective moral values because without God, there is no standard of right and wrong. There's just opinion. Saying there's bad Christians out there, well, of course, there's bad everything out there. There's bad doctors out there. That doesn't mean all doctors are bad. There's bad lawyers. That doesn't mean all lawyers are bad. There's bad politicians. Yeah, there's just bad politicians. And you get the idea here, though, right? Just because there's bad in one field doesn't make it the whole field rotten. And how does Christopher Hitchens make the claim that religion's bad at all? When there's no standard of right and wrong. At least atheist Richard Dawkins had the courage to put it out there. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. If there is no God, then your personal suffering does not matter. Murder, rape, theft, terrorism, loss of a loved one, it doesn't matter because the universe is indifferent. It doesn't care. It's not personal. But that's why there is a God, because we have a God who is personal. That's why we talk about those issues when we get together. That's why we do fight for racial reconciliation, justice for all, protection of all life, born and unborn. We talk about these things because while the universe might be blind, God is not. And if God exists, and we sure believe He does, then we have moral grounding, we have objective truth, and we can truly get through life's difficult seasons together. But without God, there's no value to life, and everything is permissible. Pictured here is Petty Officer Michael Mansour, Navy SEAL, and he served during Operation Kentucky Jumper. On September 29, 2006, Mansour's platoon was engaged by 4 insurgents. They killed one and wounded another, but they were pretty sure they were going to get attacked later on that day. So they moved positions onto rooftops, and Mansour was on a rooftop position with an escape hatch into the building below. Nobody else had an escape route. And while they took up their positions, the local citizens began blocking off streets, and they used the local mosque to call out insurgents to attack the American and Iraqi soldiers who were fighting. Mansour was with 2 SEALs 15 feet away on the rooftop with him. And while he was there, a grenade was thrown that bounced off Mansour's chest and landed onto the roof between him and the other SEALs. Mansour yelled, "Grenade!" And then he jumped onto the grenade, covering it with his body. The grenade exploded, and Mansour's body absorbed most of the force of the blast. Mansour was severely wounded, and although evacuated immediately, 30 minutes later he died. The 2 other SEALs next to him were injured, but because of Mansour's sacrifice, they survived. Shortly thereafter, President George Bush would award the highest award given to anybody, the Medal of Honor, and he would give it to Mansour's parents in his memory. Now, one of the distinguishing medals of the Navy SEALs is the Golden Trident. It's a very hard medal to earn. You go through a 65-week training program that includes underwater demolition, a 2-mile swim, and many other strength and endurance challenges. Most who begin do not finish. Those that do earn this trident. It's a very special privilege to wear one. At Michael Mansour's funeral, it was on the West Coast, and it was attended by many Navy SEALs in the area. And as they filed past the coffin, they took this pin that they gave years of their life to earn and pressed it into his coffin, turning this simple box into a gold-plated memorial. These soldiers took their identity as elite SEALs, and they placed it on the one who gave his life so they could continue to live. So I have 2 simple questions I want to ask you before I invite the worship team to join me. The first one is this: would it have been better for Michael Mansour to save his own life or to sacrifice his life to save others? And you probably don't have to think about that very long. You say, well, to sacrifice his life to save others, of course, that's better. Why? Why do you think that? If you don't believe in God, And if evolution and natural selection and survival instincts are truly what we have going for us, then he should have saved himself and let the others die. Yet we praise him for his sacrifice because we know it's better to sacrifice than to go for self-survival. We always honor those who give their lives for others, and we're amazed at the courage it takes them to give their life. But we never praise the selfish person. Why? Because it is better to sacrifice than to save your own life. And we know that from Jesus, because he said, no greater love has anyone than this, than to lay down his life for another. Jesus self-sacrificed so that we too could be saved, as Michael Monsour's fellow SEALs were. Second question is, where is your identity? Those SEALs put their identity on the one who died so that they could live. And today I invite you to put your identity on the one who sacrificed his life for you so you could live. We know that sacrifice is better than selfishness, and that's exactly what Jesus did when he went to the cross. Because here's the truth. Mother Teresa, Hitler, nobody measures up to the standard of Jesus. Nobody measures up to the standard of perfection that God has set. But Jesus made it possible for us to get to God anyway, and he did it by giving his life on the cross for our sins. We all need forgiveness. We're all fallen and broken. We need a Savior. And Jesus invites you to find your identity in him, as these soldiers found their identity in the one who died for them. And so as the worship team joins me on stage, I ask, where are you today? Have you trusted Jesus? And if not, I ask, what are you waiting for? Jesus has said he has come to give us life and give it to the full. Until you place your identity in Jesus, as these soldiers did with their comrade, you're going to be lacking. You'll be searching, and you'll be empty. But once you place your hope and trust in Jesus, your eternity is secure. And once it's secure, you can give your life for another, knowing where you're headed. That's exactly what Jesus did for us. And this morning, I invite you to trust him by meeting me down front this morning as we stand and as we sing.